Excellent. Morning, Dan. Thank you for your comments. Yes, I'm not wearing my England shirt today because I'm mindful that we may have people joining us from Italy, Denmark, or Spain, or even any other country. So I decided to go for a black jumper. So here we are. I can see people are joining. Let me just kind of click in here. I'll just ask a favor for one of the guys from Tech Southwest. If you could just kind of remind me what time we're finishing to keep us all on track, that would just help me move things forward. Yes, thanks, Joe. Forgot about that. I think it's a good point, especially here. Right, I'll kick off and I'll just do some introduction and frame setting. So I'm joined by Andy and Gavin. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. We're from RSM, which is, so RSM is the 5th largest or 6th largest accounting firm in the world. We wanted to approach this session following a piece of news we saw come out of Facebook. We thought it was really interesting to see that Facebook had announced that they were going to support very fluid global mobility of their employees, which creates all sorts of slightly niggly and sometimes quite fundamental tax issues. We were very mindful that Facebook has an enormous network of internal and external professional advisors to be able to facilitate this. But in offering kind of packages and ways of working to businesses, startups may need to try and replicate this, but may not have access to the same, support. So what we wanted to do was just talk through a couple of scenarios in a kind of open panel format. Very happy to take specific questions as we go through, or questions at the end, and just share a few things that we think are worth thinking about for a high growth business. We've kicked off with a poll. And the poll just asks a very simple question. Are your people asking to work abroad? So yes, no, or not sure yet answer. And we'll probably change the poll about halfway through to ask if we think that can we actually scale our businesses just drawing from a UK workforce. So my name's Ben, just to recap. I'm a partner based in the UK, specialised in tech businesses. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ben. I'm Andy. I work in the corporate tax team here at RSM. And that means I'm largely involved in the corporate tax compliance. But what I really enjoy is working with tech companies and their R&D claims. And that's where I feel I can add the most value.
Gavin, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, cheers, Ben. Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Gavin Phillips. I'm Associate Director here at RSM. Work really closely with Andy and Ben and a number of different clients and projects. My specialism is in employment tax, in particular global mobility. So really at the fore in terms of what we're seeing at the moment. So working with clients and organisations who may have a globally mobile workforce, individuals from the UK working overseas, recruiting individuals from overseas to work in the UK. So a load of interesting stuff in that regard, and really great to be here this morning.
Cool. Okay, well, look, why don't I kick off with our first example? We'll call it Company A, kind of classic accountancy imagination there. So this is an example we've actually seen amongst our client base recently. It's a high growth software company in the fintech space with about 10 people. In this case, an employee has renovated their camper van and has elected to start traveling through Europe in late 2021. We added a bit of colour to the example. They're going to visit all the major football stadiums from Euro 2020, but I'm not sure if that's the actual intentions of the person we're talking about. Just some points of detail. In this example, the employee is on a salary of about £40,000 a year and works on a role where they develop the platform, but also hold some personal relationships with some key customers because, as you guys would know, you tend to wear a lot of hats in a high growth business. The intention is for the team member to return to the UK in early 2022, but it's yet unsure. And the sort of question we're asked is, surely it's still fine, because in the current digital world, we're all digitally enabled and all we need is a laptop and somewhere to park the van to work. So, I mean, Gavin, when we're presented with this example, what comes to mind from your perspective in terms of the global mobility of people and what things the business should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, actually, Ben, and something we're seeing coming up quite regularly with our clients in terms of individuals wanting to work across different parts of the world on a remote basis. And there's quite a lot of things to actually think about. It could be, if an individual is working for a period of time in a particular location, will that give rise to any income tax issues, payroll withholding possibly for the company, and any social security issues as well in terms of national insurance contributions in the overseas entity and the equivalent. So quite a few important points there. So tracking any individuals who are overseas, having an awareness of those are really important, because what you don't want to happen is to have an individual working across different locations and then need to find out later down the line that's triggered some tax and social security and other expensive issues in the locations concerned.
So Gavin, what we're talking about here basically is that whilst we live in a digital world and we're global citizens, tax legislation tends to be driven in country. And so first question, high level, obviously we're talking about someone moving within Europe. So let's kind of define that as the European Union and that area. What does that mean? Does it matter that they're moving within countries in Europe? Is it one big holistic piece, or is it lots of separate countries?
Yeah, so then each country will have its own separate tax regime and tax rules, even though it's working within the European Union. So, for example, there may be separate legislation and requirements in France to there are in Denmark or in Sweden. So regard will need to be given to the precise requirements in each location concerned, which may vary. In addition to that, if you've got a UK individual working overseas, there may also be immigration considerations in the EU as well, given our current position and having exited the EU in January.
Cool. And in terms of the business, and obviously you've got a team member walking around, and I can see a question's popped up. Thanks, Elizabeth. I've tried to address that point. If you're an early stage business and you're scaling up, like you mentioned, keeping a track record of where people are, what does that look like? And what is the requirement? And I suppose what is reasonable and sensible in a business that's still at a relatively early stage?
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point, Ben. I mean, ultimately, if their individual is employed by the UK company, which is what we would anticipate in this example, I guess their place of work will be within the UK and potentially aligned to an office. So to a degree, companies still have an element of choice and discretion if an individual does ask to work in a particular location. So we see a lot of companies putting policies and procedures in place to say, look, if you want to work in a particular overseas location, let us know first, so they've got time to plan for that and to assess any tax implications that may arise.
So basically what we're saying is it could be a whole world of hurt for the business to make sure it's complying. So worth thinking about, and the starting point is a robust log of where that person is, which a lot of accounting packages will do, actually, just so people know. Some packages have plugins and additions to do that to keep it easy, but sometimes you find whoever's responsible for HR has to keep an Excel spreadsheet. So unfortunately, to kind of answer the question, is it straightforward? I think the answer is no. Andy, from a kind of, I guess let's call it corporate tax perspective, what sort of things would you be thinking about in this scenario?
Well, in this scenario, I'm quite a lot more relaxed, actually. I suppose the key point from a corporate tax perspective is whether there's a permanent establishment. And the answer is kind of in the name, right? Because if you're moving around from country to country in your camper van, then there's no degree of permanence there. At least I wouldn't say there is. However, to define what a permanent establishment is, it's what's known as a fixed place of business, where business can be conducted or wholly or partly conducted. And again, I would say that in this example, we don't have a fixed place of business if it is a camper. And also, if it is a software developer working in the back of her van, then I wouldn't say that's where business is conducted. It's too small a part of the business as a whole. So I'm in this example, I'm quite relaxed from a corporate tax perspective. To touch on Elizabeth's question as well, though, I would say if she was in a country for certainly more than 6 months, so 183 days, I may well start to be thinking, right, actually, the levels of permanence start to change there. Cool. And where I would say is particularly helpful is that, again, knowing where they're going in advance, and with a firm like ourselves, we can just pick up the phone or an email to our international colleagues and just ask, we've got a person who's going to be traveling to Sweden or Switzerland or Denmark for a month or 2 months. Is this going to cause you any issues from a corporate tax perspective and from an employment tax perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think parking that there are a number of other firms are available that can give the professional advice. It's just focusing, I think, as well on what do you have to think about as a founder or someone responsible on the board for this. And I think, Gavin, from your perspective, looking at Elizabeth's question, in terms of how long does an employee have to work abroad for issues to arise, what's your starting point as a response?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one in terms of, is 1 day enough, is 2 days enough? So unfortunately, just 1 day working in an overseas location is probably a good starting point. There isn't really any broad brush answer to this, aside from, as what we said before, tracking the time that they're in the particular location, so you can assess when the tax liability arises. If someone's in a location, for 90 days, it is quite a long period of time. So you're looking at 3 months. It may well be that tax relief's available under a double taxation treaty, but issues may arise. So I would say any period of time working overseas, probably as a minimum in excess of a month, would need consideration.
I mean, what we're talking about here is a tax and legislative landscape that doesn't match the world that we're a digitally enabled world we're living in. And, we'll have seen at the G7 summit, or just before, the announcement of a kind of internationally agreed base tax rate, which the Irish government have said they don't like for obvious economic reasons. That's a starting point to kind of creating some form of tax parity. And I think what I would say is, unfortunately, at the moment, when you start working internationally, it can become sort of enormously complicated. I just thought, I'm mindful of we've only got a few seconds. We've got a couple of questions. Let's try and track them. Andy, can I retouch a point? In our example, before we answer Anthony and Simon's question, which we will do, if the individual in the camper van was concluding contracts, was directing the business, was operating in a slightly different way, how would that change how relaxed you are about the example?
Well, yeah, you probably saw me squirm a little bit there.
It's okay to say it might make it more complex, but I mean, what sort of things make you more nervous?
Exactly that kind of thing of concluding contracts is a concern. If that person was a director or someone more senior, then I'd be a bit more concerned, because then you can argue that they are making business decisions in that country. So they're the kind of things to worry about. If they start having business cards as well, showing that they're working from Denmark for a particular week or a month and meeting customers during that time, that's where you start to grey the area in terms of whether something is a permanent establishment or not. And if so, that's when you may need to start thinking about registering a business there. I guess. I don't know if
Andy,
really go into our second example, but that probably.
I don't think we do, Andy. I'm afraid. Yeah, I'm just mindful of time. We've got 3 minutes, and I'm going to be quite quick and look at the 2 questions. It may be other people. So, Anthony, in terms of your question and the individual in Italy, what I would say is that would require, I think, a review of what the person was doing, what their role was. Italy's quite a complex tax landscape. It's just worth speaking to someone and saying, look, have I done everything right? Because it sounds like at the moment they're still being remunerated for UK payroll. It might just need a bit of consideration. And I would say in that example, we are seeing that quite a lot. And I'll give you an example. If that person was in Ireland, there is a fixed period of time. And if they go over that fixed period of time, it does become problematic. But I'm not aware of what the Italian rules are off the top of my head. And Simon, in your example about the sale of cloud-based software, effectively that looks like a reseller agreement. And I think you would probably start by looking at whether your reseller is a principal or an agent. And then you would think about whether the operations create nexus in each state. And I would say, again, it's a really good example. And the answer is it depends. In terms of accountancy, SaaS is a kind of relatively new area. The accounting requirements in the UK and the US are still in draft. There's no detailed published international and US GAAP guidance yet. So we're interpreting the existing standards, and that filters through to tax. So it's a really good example, and it's actually something we deal with all the time. And Joe, I'm mindful that we have time here. So I'll just wrap up by saying, look, we're here. If anything's come up on the call and you thought, oh, blimey, this might be relevant to my business, as part of our work with Tech Southwest, we're very happy to always have a conversation. There's no fee, it's just a chat, and almost kind of guide you down a risk-based approach So I would say feel free to reach out to me, Andy, or Gavin, and we're all happy to have a chat. And if you just say it's there as a starting point. And thank you so much for everybody's time.
Yeah, and Simon, I would say maybe it would be worth reaching out to us after this, and we're more than happy to have that conversation. Cool. As I found that the United States of America are anything but united in these kind of things with tax.
Absolutely, great. Well, I'll hand over to the chat channel to our hosts and organisers, the directors, on where we need to go next. But I guess we'll hang around in the room as well, just in case anyone wants to hang around for 5 minutes or so.
We didn't get time to look at our poll, did we?
We can chat about our poll. We can just keep talking.
Can you see the results of the poll? Because I actually can't on my screen.
Let me have a look. Yeah, we go into session, go into poll. I can tell you, Andy, the results are 40% say people are abroad. One says no, I won't let them, and 2, it's being discussed. So fairly even split, which reflects kind of where we're at in terms of the landscape, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. Is that what you expected, Andy?
I actually didn't expect so many people to be abroad at the moment, to be honest with you. I was expecting it's being discussed at the moment as to being the main answer. So
often you only find out when they dial in and they've got a beach behind them. I've had that scenario before. It's quite interesting with social media businesses. I don't know if you've seen this in your client base, but I've seen it at one of mine, where the CEO is in America, for example, influencing. We have a very high profile CEO going around the world, and the tax authorities are tracking his movements by his posts. And the advice is, please, like, to some extent he has to do it, but please don't complain when you create a tax problem for yourself when you keep on logging in from abroad, because it creates this very visible tax profile. And yeah,
I know another business which is, the guy's young, so of course he's all over social media and he's very keen to promote his business. It's a great way of promoting the business as well, but also shows that he's working from America quite a lot.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about the same business, aren't we? We're on a no names basis, but yeah, we're talking about the same example, aren't we? Which is
quite possibly.
Yeah. Good. Okay, well, look, obviously I can see tons of people Stuart's still in the chat channel, for example. If anyone wants to kind of have a chat and ask a question, we'll give you maybe a minute or so to find out, and if not, we'll just leave the session and we'll move on and join something else and participate in the conference.
And by all means, you can actually ask, I don't know if you've used Hopin before, but you can actually ask to join our panel and come on screen and video and ask a direct question as well.
Yeah, I think some people might just be having a cup of tea and they're left behind.
And that's completely fine too.
Just hearing us waffle on, but I feel it's but British in me. I want to be like a really good host, so I would feel rude just leaving. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, look. Dan said thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody else. Why don't we leave the session and move on? And look, any questions, catch up with us directly. Thanks, everybody.